What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome to the French Alps. I am in the little village of Aurelle, right next to Saint-Michel de Maurienne, and some of you might know that because that is nestled at the foot of the legendary Col du Télégraphe and Col du Galibier. And that is exactly why I am here this weekend. For this weekend, it is Galibier Challenge weekend. And we're starting today with Maurienne gravel. Final preparations are done, breakfast has been consumed, and it would appear that the clouds are ever so slightly disappearing as I can see the blue sky peeking through. Let's hope the conditions stay like this. It is not the warmest of temperatures. Yesterday was actually very cold as I went for my shakeout ride, but it's relatively acceptable, so it should be okay. So on the menu today is a 60-kilometer gravel race, which is incidentally my first ever gravel race, and what an amazing place to actually do that. It is of course going to be quite spicy as we are in the Alps, as one might expect. So the race is going to start with somewhat of a run-in on asphalt for about, I'm going to say, 6-7 kilometers, and then we're going to hit a give or take 10-kilometer gravel climb that I reckoned 2 days ago. It is very chunky, loose gravel, and it is an average gradient of about 10% or more, with pitches up to 17. So quite spicy. That's the most difficult climb of the day. And then we're gonna kind of meander our way around the towns of Valmenier and Valloire. And Valloire is where the Telegraph kind of ends and the Galibier starts. And we're gonna kind of do some off-road riding around there to then head back to Valmenier for the finish. So really looking forward to this. I'm very excited. This is, you know, the first time I'm going to be racing a gravel race. So yeah, the fitness is there. It's good. If we're on a good day, then hopefully we should be able to put down some watts and maybe put in a PR for what is hopefully going to be about a 3.5-hour race. In terms of rankings, I have absolutely no idea what the field is going to be like, so I'm not going to worry too much about that. Last year, there were about 42 people lining up at the start. No idea what's happening today. So we'll see. We'll give it our best, and we'll just enjoy ourselves. See you in the race. And here we are at the start line in the center of Saint-Michel de Maurienne. And boy, oh boy, where do I begin with this recap? Well, I guess at the beginning, and the start line would be a good place to do that. It's going to be a bit of an interesting one for me to watch this footage again, given how this all panned out. I am listening and looking and watching myself on the footage prior to the actual start, the excitement levels, and I'm going to be dead honest, the levels of me being naive are quite through the roof, if I'm being perfectly honest, and you'll kind of start understanding as the race recap unfolds. There were about 35-ish, 37-ish people at the start line, so pretty much the same as it was last year. And I'll tell you a little bit more towards the end of the video about what that means for the future of this race, and it'll kind of tie in nicely with with my experience of the race as well, but that will become clearer as we continue the recap.
3, 2, 1, top départ de cette édition 2024 du Maurienne Gravel Experience aux 65 km avec d'ores et déjà voilà un départ.
So as we start the race, we swing a right here and kind of make our way through the town center of Saint-Michel de Maurienne with an immediate, relatively punchy, steep climb that's going to lead us into the first gravel section. And because of the narrow field, or the very reduced field of 37, it immediately blows apart as the front of the race absolutely lights it up. I'm a little bit too far back, but I still put in a very big effort here to try and move up as close as possible to the front, because I know that once we kind of finish this first gravel section, we're going to have that long stretch of asphalt road, and I would want to be somewhere in a group or with somebody of my level to be able to cross, bridge across, to that first very difficult long climb. So I'm going to let this footage kind of play out a little bit, and as it does, I'm going to share my plan for this race. So going into this and in preparation for this race, the main thing that I wanted to do well for was the actual Sunday event, was the actual Galibier challenge, the road fondo. And I noticed that this gravel event was on the day before, so my thinking was, well, might as well make the trip worth its while and add that to the calendar as well. How hard can it be? Boy, oh boy, turned out quite hard. I looked at the profile, I looked at the numbers, and I somehow, somewhere in my mind, didn't register the fact that 55 to 60 kilometers with 2,000 meters plus of elevation was going to be quite the tall order. Somehow my mind just got focused on that 55 kilometer number or 60 kilometer number and thought, well, that's pretty short. You've done that 1,000 times, that type of a ride. So yeah, why don't you just go ahead and add that to the calendar and you'll be fine. So then as I was preparing, I thought, okay, well, I'll just try and do a massive effort up that first climb. I'm going to try and hold 45 minutes to 50 minutes of FTP, which for me was 260 watts. So I said, I'm going to try and hold around 250. And then once I get to the top, I'll see how I feel, I'll see how I am, and I'll see with who I am or what the situation is like, and then take it from there. That was the plan. I'm going to tell you already right now, it didn't quite work out that way. But here, as I am leaving that first gravel section and I'm about to attack that relatively large stretch of road towards the base of the first climb, things are still relatively okay. We're coming out of this first gravel section and I'm in the company of about two other riders. There's the guy with the blue jersey right behind me, and we're about to kind of make our way to the main road and start putting down a little bit of tempo, do a bit of a pace line, and kind of start taking turns to keep the tempo up. And as we do, the rider in blue, you can't see on the footage, he kind of drops off, and it's just the two of us that gradually start kind of catching on to another rider in front of us that is in sight, and that also wasn't quite able to kind of latch on to the first 5 riders on the road, 5 or 6 riders, give or take, on the road. They were of a different level, and even if I would have been able to ride with them, I would have completely blown off my doors even before I started that first climb. And so then here we go at the base of that first massive gravel climb of the day, and you'll notice here that there is a little group of 3 of us, which is that other rider that I mentioned in the previous shot. We caught him at about a K or so before the base of the climb. And you'll see here in the Strava analysis that my average watts for the first 23 minutes of the race was 217 watts. Nothing to write home about, and something that I should normally be able to deal with without any issue, and that in fact at that moment in time I was able to deal with up until then, and I felt pretty good going into the base of that first climb. Base of that first climb is still paved, and then it kind of transitions into that loose, chunky gravel. So pretty much straight from the gun here, as we hit the base of the climb, we separate, and I say goodbye to my 2 other companions. Sorry, we each start riding at our own pace, and I start locking into that 250 watt number. And the goal is, as I had mentioned, to try and bring that home at least to the top of the first climb, then assess how I feel and take it from there. And still, up until this point, things are still going relatively okay. I am still able to put down the numbers that I want to put down, and I am also catching 2 of the riders that would have been part of that 5-man group that broke away straight from the gun. As I am making my way up this gravel climb, I just passed 1 rider that I didn't catch on footage. Here's a second guy that I'm kind of catching, overtaking, and then leaving behind, as I am just focusing on my effort, focusing on putting down the watts. And as you can see here from the Strava analysis file, that first section of that climb, my average watts were pretty much where I wanted them to be, just shy of about 250 watts. So as I said, things were going relatively okay up until this point. But about halfway up the climb, things started getting a bit hairy. That's me taking probably the worst turn in the history of gravel racing. My front wheel slips, I go into a slight panic and decide to go straight instead of right, then have to correct myself, barely keep myself on the bike to be able to finally make the turn. It's at that moment in time that I start realizing gravel is different than roads, and I'm starting to really experience the level of that difference. The energy expenditure is completely different, and I'm coming to terms with that. The second part of the climb, things start declining. From a numbers point of view, my watts are just going down from 240 to 230 to 225 to 220, and that's about what I can put out at that moment in time. And it was one of those days where I just wasn't able to push on. I wasn't able to put the hurt down. You know, if you've raced, you'll know that when you somehow are able to arrive in peak shape and you get a good day, you've got these moments in a race or in an event where you can go straight through the wall into the red zone multiple times, and on some weird level it kind of feels good in your pain. This day was just, the watts were going down, they were capped, and there was no way, even if I wanted to mentally, to nudge them back up from 225 to 230 to 245 as I had done. My legs were just saying, nope, ain't gonna happen, we're done. And you can see here how my average watts just plummets during the second part of that climb. And on top of that, about a K from the top of the first climb, I realized my front wheel had come loose and my through axle had come loose. So I had to stop and kind of reattach that, kind of swirl it back into position, get back on the bike, make it to the top. And then here, as I'm about to crest, I realize the through axle has come loose again, and I'm actually forced to stop again. I try to put the through axle back in position, try to get that purchase if you'd like, but this time it's actually refusing to do so. So I'm thinking, right, this is it, right? Because if I can't fix this thing, then I'm done. There's no way that I can keep riding with this, and definitely not on gravel, and definitely not going down, so I will have to call it quits. So I try and calm myself down a little bit, try and get my heart rate down, and I try and just get the through axle to get that purchase, to lock into position almost, to start tightening up. And I've watched the footage again, and then the better part of 4 or 5 minutes, me standing here kind of getting my wheel to completely detach, putting it back in, trying the same thing over and over and over again until eventually I get that purchase. Eventually the through axle seems to get hold. I get it locked in, and then I test it a couple of times, of course, and decide, okay, this looks relatively good. Let's crack on. But the thing is, I'm about to hit a kind of descent. It's not a full-on descent, but it's kind of downhill relatively to the town center of Valminier, where we're going to then go into the kind of second loop of the race, if you like. And so what I'm doing here at this moment in time is obviously I'm hitting that descent, and I'm constantly checking whether the through axle is going to keep holding, because at the slightest sign of my front wheel coming loose again, I have to stop. But I'm going down this gravel path at probably 35 to 40 k's an hour. So in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, is this sensible what I'm doing? And so this is costing me an awful lot of energy. At the same time, I'm also realizing yet another element of today, that I am not going to have any respite during this race, because going uphill is tough on road. It's even tougher on gravel. Going downhill on road is somewhat of a time to relax. You got to keep your wits about you when you take your turns, but you can give your legs a break somewhat. Going downhill on gravel requires so much energy, specifically on this track here, because it's very loose gravel and it was, I guess, relatively technical, at least it was to me. I was having to just focus, concentrate, and it was costing me so much energy to keep the bike in the right position that I'm coming to the realization that, well, I'm not going to be able to just sit up at any point in this race, or barely any point. And I'm realizing I'm in for a tough day. The fact that I'm not on a good day, my legs didn't show up, and I've got this realization, it's going to hurt. So here, as I am coming out of that second huge gravel section, I am rocking up to the aid station, the only aid station of the race, and I'm still in race mode. I'm going for a F1 pit stop sort of a thing because I still want to keep pressing on. It still hasn't entirely dawned on me that the day that I have today isn't going to be the one. So if at the aid station I hadn't kind of snapped out of my delusion, then the next gravel section absolutely knocked the message home for me. The watts just went south and there was no way for me to recuperate. If you look at the analysis here, the kind of downhill section from the top of that main climb to the aid station, 157 watts, but a lot of that was just kind of going downhill, not pedaling at all, and I somehow managed to get a P9 on the Strava leaderboard, so I wouldn't have done half bad at that moment in time. But then the entire second part of the race, I had an average watts of 162, which for me is an easy-ish zone to ride, but that's just all I had. The second part of the race was, I mean, there wasn't an awful lot of climbing left. There was a lot of just kind of flattish gravel sections in that kind of valley area in the town of Valois, which again is where the Galibier kind of really starts. I mean, there were still, you know, pretty rough gravel roads, but I just didn't have anything left. I just wasn't able to put down any more power. And from that moment on, it was just a case of just finishing the race. And in hindsight, I should have enjoyed it more at that moment in time, but I was a bit disappointed and was too focused on the performance element on the day. And I just should have snapped out of it. I just should have told myself, look, you're here in a beautiful part of the world. You're riding your bike in an exquisite surrounding. Just enjoy it for what it is and just let go of the performance thing. And that's definitely something I'm going to take with me for future races, that, you know, the performance is only, it is only what it is. So I think that the combination of just not a good day with me being overly confident in my fitness, thinking that I could just, you know, go and put down a 45-50 minute effort at FTP and then still somehow muster up some power to continue what is essentially still going to be a 2-hour spell of riding. It just kind of really kind of grounded me after that race and you know, put me back on the ground in terms of, yeah, you know, listen, you're not a top level talent, so be humble and be realistic with how you pace your races. And so together with myself, my GoPro also then kind of ran out of juice and I don't have the finish on footage. All right, before we wrap the video with some words that I recorded as I got back to the B&B after the race, I want to take a look at the actual numbers of the race in total. So total race time of 3 hours and 18 minutes. Average watts was 184, normalized 204. Last year, I had put down a 200 average watts raw over 4 hours. So I am about 20 watts shy here over what is give or take an hour less of racing. So to give you some perspective on why this wasn't a good day for me. Now, I don't want this to be a complete bad news show, so I want to leave with two positive things before we wrap. One, what an amazing place to ride my bike in. The French Alps are just drop dead gorgeous. Anybody who's been there will be able to confirm that. And I got to take that. You know, that is one of the main reasons why we do these things. And like I said, I should have focused on that a little bit more. So, you know, that as a bottom line should be more than enough. And two, I actually ended up being a 7th on the day out of 37 people at the start line. And that is my first P10, or my first top 10 in my Gran Fondo career. For what it's worth, I will take it and I will put it in the bank. It's something that will not be taken away from me. I have the proof. So not all is bad. Okay, and then a quick note, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, on the future of this race. Word on the street, and the street I mean at the finish line, was that this race might not have a version in 2025 because of the limited amount of participants, and more particularly the lack of growth from the 23 event to the 24 event. In fact, there was almost no growth, as you could see from the participant numbers, about 35-ish, and it was exactly the same last year, which apparently, again, word on the street was, or is, that the organizers are kind of doubting whether they can kind of have this event gain a bit of traction. And one of the participants I was talking to was saying that it's probably because it's too difficult. Gravel racing is, you know, on the up and up in Europe as well, but gravel racing in the Alps is quite the tall order, so it might be a bit intimidating to most people, and it might not really attract the volume that they need to keep making this race sustainable. Well, I can definitely attest to the fact that it is quite difficult, but then again, I'm thinking, you know, you want to give yourself a bit of a challenge, but hey, there you go. That's just the kind of rundown on that one. If anybody from the organization watches this and has information on whether or not this will happen next year, please chip into the comments. And if we are not seeing that in the comment section, we'll just have to keep our eye out on their website to see if it will happen. Maurienne Gravel 2025, we will have to see. Right guys, that is me back from the race, and I'm very sorry that I do not have any footage of the finish. The GoPro battery died, but to be perfectly honest, I needed all the energy I could muster to simply finish the damn thing. That was not a good day on the bike. I mean, it was a great day on the bike. I mean, just look at the scenery here. I mean, it's always going to be a good day, but it wasn't a great day in terms of performance. I was not able to put down the watts that I would have ideally wanted to put down. I just faded. I just didn't have it today. First part of the race was still kind of moderately okay, but then it was just a slow descent into fade and struggleville. Not too sure what that is all about, but I'm not going to worry about it too much. I have another day tomorrow, so I'm just going to spend a bit of time to recover, eat, and then get ready for tomorrow and see how it goes. Average watts 181 and normalized 211. I'm not too sure whether my estimations were just off or whether I just massively overestimated my fitness level or ability at this moment in time, or it was just a bad day. Probably a bit of both. I would have wanted the average watts to be, you know, around 200, and then the normalized, yeah, probably higher than what it was right now. But then, you know, again, on these gravel descents, you're not doing a lot of pedaling, you know, you're just kind of making sure you're staying upright. And some of these descents were pretty sketchy, and yeah, I'm not the most technically gifted rider, so I ended up spending a lot of energy on those descents. You're never really kind of taking a break, you're never really kind of recovering because you're constantly exuding energy, I guess. So, but anyway, it was one hell of an experience, the first time for me, this type of a gravel race. And again, I mean, look at this, you can't really complain, right? So tomorrow on the road bike, we'll see. I am going to change the plan that I originally had, because there's no way that I'm probably going to be able to do the power numbers that I had in mind. It was about a 3.5 hour race today. It's looking like probably 4 to 4.5 hours tomorrow. And we're going to need to have something left for the ascent of the Galibier, right? So, I hope you enjoyed the video, and thank you for joining along. I am going to try and find some energy to get a shower, put myself horizontally, and then just try and get into somewhat of a decent shape tomorrow. But we'll see tomorrow morning how I wake up, how that is going to pan out. out. So massively appreciate you checking out this video. If you liked it, hit it, give it a like. That would be much appreciated. And if you like the stuff on the channel, then consider subscribing. I will see you in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, enjoy what you're doing, and catch you soon.